So in case any of you are new here for the first time, what we usually do is start with some meditation, and then we have a short break. Then after the break, I give a talk, some aspect of Buddhist teachings about Buddhism. Are there any of you who have not meditated before? Who are completely new to meditation? I just wonder if I need to explain the basics. Okay. Okay, so let's start by getting ourselves settled down physically and mentally and emotionally. So let's start with the physical, the body. So just check to see if you're comfortable the way that you're sitting. So try to find a position that's comfortable enough so that you don't have to move too much during the next 20, 30 minutes. I mean, it's not that you can't move at all, but it is helpful to try not to move too much, because when we move our body, then our mind also gets a little shaken. So it's harder to have a steady, calm state of mind if your body is moving. So just take a few minutes to settle down in a comfortable position. But comfortable doesn't mean sloppy, because it's good to keep the back straight if you can. You know, if you have some injury, some problem with your back and you can't straighten your back, then okay, you just have to make adjustments. But if you can keep your back straight, then it's good to do that, because that helps the mind to be more clear and concentrated and alert. But having a straight back doesn't mean having a tense, tight back and shoulders. So let your shoulders relax. And one way to relax, get our body more relaxed, is to take a few breaths, long, slow, deep breaths. So breathe in slowly, as much as you can, not to the point of being uncomfortable, but breathe in a lot. And then just pause for a moment, and then let your breath go out slowly, not in a sort of gasp, but just slowly let the breath go out. And you can imagine if there is any tension in your body or in your mind, that it goes out with the breath, and then it just disappears in space. So do that for 3 breaths, and then just continue your usual way of breathing. Now, even after doing that, you might still feel some tension in your body? And if so, another thing you could try is to imagine that the tension melts and then flows down and out. You can imagine it sinking down into the earth beneath us and then just disappearing in the earth. And you don't need to worry about it anymore. So just let any tension in your body or in your mind drain away from you, drain out of you, and sink into the earth. So even if there's still some tension in your body, don't worry about it. Don't get tense about it. Don't have more tension on top of the tension. Just feel that you've done the best you can to release the tension, and just try to stay free of tension for the remainder of the time that we're meditating. And then for the mind, you might notice thoughts floating around in your mind that are related to things you did today or any time in the past. Or there might be thoughts about the future, plans for what you're going to do later tonight or tomorrow or any time in the future. Or you may be thinking about your work, your relationships, problems. So any thoughts like that, just put them aside for now. Thoughts are not solid things. Thoughts are just aspects of our mind, and our mind is not a solid physical thing. It's just a stream of different mental states, different mental experiences that come and go. They're all impermanent, they're all transitory, like the clouds that come and go in the sky. They're not solid, they're not permanent. You try to understand that and just let go of or put aside thoughts. You just imagine them floating away, disappearing into space, just like clouds coming and then disappearing from the sky. So just try to keep your mind, your awareness in the present, right here where we are in this place, not other places. And right now in this present moment, not the past or the future. And that's not so easy to do because our mind is so accustomed to thinking all the time. But one thing that's helpful to be in the present, the here and now, is to focus on our breathing. Be aware of the breath coming in and going out, because our breath is happening right here in the present place, present moment. So by focusing on the breath, we are staying in the present. So that's actually the main practice that we're going to be doing tonight, is focusing on the breath. But before we really get deeply into that, the last couple of weeks, I've also been talking about the importance of having a state of mind of loving kindness and compassion. I mean, it's good to have this as much as we can during our day, during our life, but it's also very important when we're meditating. So it will help our meditation to go better, help our mind to stay more calm and peaceful and more concentrated. And also ensures that our meditation is taking us in a positive direction, taking us to a place where we'll just have more and more love and compassion for ourselves and others, and do good things, beneficial things rather than harmful things. So I've talked about a few ways to get ourselves into a positive state of mind. So last week, I made a suggestion that we could imagine that there are many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas around. This is what it's said in Mahayana Buddhism, that there are many, many, many Buddhas, enlightened beings, as well as Bodhisattvas, those who are on the way to enlightenment. And they're always around, they're always aware of us, with a state of mind that's just total unconditional love and compassion, not the slightest aversion or criticalness or judgmentalness. So if you like that idea, if you find that helpful, you can just spend a bit of time thinking about that, and try to really feel that you are the object of love, unconditional love, by all these enlightened beings, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and that they have the same unconditional love for everyone else, for all living beings. So contemplating that might help you to get into that state of mind as well, state of kindness, compassion, love, concern, softness and gentleness towards yourself, towards others. But for some people that may not be very helpful. And another way would be to just remind yourself that everyone, ourselves and everyone else, all beings, are basically the same, in that we all want happiness and we all do not want to suffer. Nobody wants pain, nobody wants unhappiness, nobody wants suffering. Everyone just wants to be happy and to be treated with kindness and gentleness. So you might find that contemplating that for a few minutes might also help to soften your mind, to make your mind soft and gentle and caring towards yourself and towards others. So just take a few minutes to do one of those practices, or some other practice you know of that can help you to be in a state of mind that's warm and caring and loving, soft and gentle. Okay, and then when you feel ready to move into the main part of the practice, that is to observe the breath, try to stay focused or concentrated on the breath as much as possible. It's a bit like the mind sitting still on the breath, not running away to other objects like thoughts of the past or the future or other places. Of course, those kinds of thoughts do come up in our mind. They will come up in our mind. That's normal. So don't get upset about that. Just notice when that has happened. Then as soon as you can, gently disengage your mind from that other object and bring it back to the breath. And just keep doing this again and again, trying to not lose your patience, trying not to get frustrated with yourself, trying to remain soft and gentle, kind and patient towards yourself, towards your mind. And if you find it helpful, you can count your breaths in rounds of 5 breaths or 10 breaths or however you want to do it. That's up to you. And you don't have to as well. It's just an option that can help you to stay focused on the breath. I don't know if you find this length of time too long or too short. It's a little hard to know how, because I think some of you probably have quite a bit of experience meditating. So if the session is too short, you may feel, oh, I don't have enough time to get into it. But on the other hand, if you're somewhat new to meditation, then maybe it seems too long for you. So it's about 20 minutes. We're doing about 20 minutes. Is that an okay amount of time? Or, I mean, when you're meditating on your own, if you meditate on your own, you can decide for yourself how long or how short you want to keep your sessions. But with a group of people, it's a little tricky because everyone's at a different level, and so I'm just trying to make a medium length session, not too long, not too short. Any questions or comments or? I don't know if you know about some of the in the traditional texts, they mention obstacles, problems that can occur when meditating, and that we need to look out for these. And if they occur, then we need to know how to deal with them. So one problem is sleepiness, falling asleep during meditation. Do any of you have that problem? I'm sure also at this time of the day, if you've been working busy all day, then this might be the first time all day that you're sitting down and relaxing. So then all the tiredness can catch up. So, I mean, different people have different temperaments or body clocks. Some people are like, I'm a morning person. For me, morning is the best time. That's when I have the most amount of energy, and that's when I like to meditate, first thing in the morning. But other people don't like the morning at all. They're not morning people, they're evening people. So that's when they feel a lot of energy. So anyway, if and when sleepiness occurs, do you know what to do about it? Any idea?
Open your eyes, maybe.
Yeah, that's one thing you can do, because if we close our eyes, it's more easy to fall asleep. It's like then there's darkness, and also our body has that habit of, when we are tired, we go to bed at night or we take a nap, we close our eyes, and then that's like the time to fall asleep. So closing the eyes completely is a sort of makes it easier to fall asleep. And that's why in some traditions, they advise you not to close your eyes when you meditate, but to leave them open a little bit. Well, there's different traditions. I've heard in the Zen tradition, sometimes they tell you to keep your eyes open all the way. And I think they sometimes sit in front of a wall, so they're just looking at the wall. And in our tradition, the Gelugpa tradition, the advice is to keep the eyes partially open, and then just have your gaze looking down on whatever's in front of you. So then you just have them partly open. And that's in a way helpful, because if you have them completely open, and if there's movement in the room, things going on in the room, you're more likely to get distracted by that. Whereas if they're just partly open, you won't be so likely to get distracted by things that you see. But you have some light, there's light coming in, and that helps to not fall asleep. But still, I have the experience sometimes of, even with eyes partially open, I can still feel sleepy. So if that happens, then you can open them even wider. So you can open them wide and just focus on one spot, like on the carpet or the table or whatever's in front of you. Just stare at one spot and don't let your eyes look around at other things. So that can sometimes help to avoid sleepiness. I think also sitting up straight, because, you know, even if you start off sitting up straight, but if you're tired, you know, your body might, you know, eventually get like this. So you can just check your posture. And if you have kind of drooped, then sit up straight again, because I think sitting up straight helps to bring up the energy, wake up the energy. And also in general, it's better not to meditate right after eating. I don't know, maybe that's the case for some of you. What time do Danish people have dinner? I know in some countries like Spain and Italy, they'd have dinner at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. So,
Like 7.
so do you have dinner before you come here? Yeah, because that's problematic. If you have a full stomach and then you sit down and try to meditate, that makes it easier to fall asleep. So they generally say it's better not to try meditating right after eating. So maybe what you could do is just have a light snack before meditation, before you come here, and then have more later if you need to. So that's one thing. And also heat, like if we have trouble controlling the temperature in here, but you know, if it's too warm, the temperature is too warm, the heat also is conducive to sleepiness. So it's better to have some cool and fresh air blowing around, and then just put a shawl or a sweater around you to keep yourself warm. And another thing they say is if you try all those other things and you're still feeling sleepy, one thing you can do is on the level of imagination or visualization, to think of light, like think of some bright light, even the sun, and just imagine that and focus on that. So this is sort of an internal image, and that's said to help you to stay awake. It's just like, you know, when we turn on the light, we wake up in the morning. Darkness leads to sleepiness, and light, brightness, leads to being awake. So those are various things you could try. And they say if you're on your own and you're feeling really sleepy and you try those things but they don't work, you're still feeling sleepy, then they say maybe it's best to just take a break. Get up and walk around a bit, put some cold water on your face, get some fresh air, do some exercise to wake yourself up, and then come back and try again. And I find in my own experience, because I sometimes do long retreats where doing many hours of meditation, and especially in the afternoon after lunch, I always have trouble staying awake. But what I find is that if you just resist it, don't, you know, like fight it, don't let it yourself go to sleep, then eventually it passes. It's like a phase. It's just a transitory experience. Because sometimes you may think, oh, I'm sleepy. I'm feeling sleepy. Therefore, I must go to sleep. And you just go with it. You let it happen. But that's not necessarily true. Sleepiness, the feeling of, or the kind of wish to fall asleep, is just a transitory thing. And if you just try to fight it and keep yourself awake, eventually it passes. And then you're awake again and you have plenty of energy. That's my experience. But on the other hand, sometimes sleepiness happens because you're not getting enough sleep at night. You know, like if you're overworked, overstressed, not having enough rest and sleep, then when you sit down and meditate, all that tiredness catches up with you. So you could also look at that. Make sure you do get enough sleep at night and you are getting enough rest. So those are all different things to try to work with to combat the problem of sleepiness. I mean, it's not that, falling asleep is bad. It's just that it's not helpful for meditation, because ideally, to get the results of meditation, we want to be able to have a state of mind that's awake and alert and sharp and bright and clear. So a dull, heavy, sleepy state of mind is not at all uh, the direction that we want to go in. It's not conducive for waking up the mind and eventually getting to enlightenment. Yeah.
Because I had a head trauma, I had to sit up for many years and meditate instead of sleeping. And I found out that you can sleep and meditate. So, like, letting this sleep state happen while you are on another level watching it. And that turns it around somehow. Maybe that's the same thing we were talking about.
So you're saying you would sit up all night
Yes.
and meditate, but go into some kind of sleep state?
And
But
this
with
heaviness
awareness.
we're talking about, it's like if you can on one level be aware while on another level let it happen somehow.
Mhm. So is that also like lucid dreaming? People who have this ability to be aware while they're dreaming. Or were you dreaming? Were you dreaming sometimes?
Hmm. It's like going through a kind of regeneration where the whole system is giving up in a way, but at the same time you're sitting there, because you
Mhm.
cannot, I couldn't lie down.
And so your body, your mind were getting rested
Yeah,
and
getting the same,
regenerated.
you needed rest, but
Mhm.
in another way.
Mhm. Hmm. I don't know. That sounds interesting. I mean, it's not something I have experience of, but yeah. I mean, there are in the Buddhist tradition, there are meditators who never lie down. Practitioners who sit up all night long, and I'm not sure exactly. I guess they're meditating. They're in a meditative state. So they say that, yeah, it is possible to do without sleep in the usual, what we normally understand as sleep, lying down and really going unconscious. So they're able to, like you say, regenerate themselves without having to lie down and start snoring, as most people do. So,
It's like some part of the brain is doing that thing, and another part of you is knowing it.
mhm. Are you still able to do that, or?
The last 2 years I can lie down, but I've done it for many, many years because something
Out
went
of
wrong in my head.
You couldn't lie down. Mhm. Mm. Yeah, I heard there are some people who are able to go without sleep, not meditators, but just ordinary people who don't want to waste their time. They have so much energy and they just want to do things with it, with their time rather than sleeping. And they're able to do it. But then there are other people who try to do that, but then they can't. So it seems that different people have different needs, physical needs. Some people are able to go with very little sleep or no sleep, but other people need 7, 8, 9, 10 hours.
I mean, before I had these traumas, I loved to sleep.
Most people like to sleep. and sleep deprivation is actually quite harmful. When people are deprived of sleep, not able to sleep, that can have really harmful consequences on, most people. Anyway, everyone is different, so I think we have to just find what
One
works.
gets into kind of high if one doesn't sleep for a long, long time. You are constantly in a kind of high.
Mm. I don't know, I just heard it could be harmful. If you go for too long without sleep. I can't remember what kind of harm it is, but some kind of harm.
With memory.
Hmm?
Memory. It really hits the memory.
Okay, how about we have a 10-minute break? And I don't know if any of you are new here, but you can go upstairs and there's some tea, coffee, biscuits. So I'll ring the gong when it's time to come back. Hello, hello, hello. No, I think it's working. Okay. Yeah, so I've been talking about some of the basic teachings of Buddhism. We also started by looking at the Buddha's life. And tonight we're going to look at a little bit of the history and development of Buddhism that happened after the Buddha passed away, and some of the different traditions that developed and they're still existing in the world today. So this is actually a really huge topic because Buddhism, I mean, the Buddha lived about 2,500 years ago. And so that's a long time, 2,500 years for Buddha's teachings to spread in different parts of the world and for different traditions to develop. So we don't have the time to go into all the different traditions. And also, I'm not a scholar, I'm not like a professor who has studied all these different traditions. Um, so I'm just sharing with you as much as I know. And also in the Tibetan tradition, you know, most of my knowledge comes from the Tibetan lamas. And normally they don't say much at all about Buddhist history, and it's not an important subject for them, and so on. So I haven't really learned that much from my teachers about this. So anyway, we're just going to look at this topic briefly, and it's just to help you understand there are different traditions of Buddhism and what are the major differences between them. So this will just be a very rough kind of overview. Okay, so Buddhism started in India. And I don't know if you've been to India, how much you know about India, but it's a big country. And the place where the Buddha lived is this area here. They call it the Ganges Plain. So it's a northeastern part of India, just below Nepal. But back in those days, at the time of the Buddha, there weren't all these lines dividing different countries. So anyway, this is where Buddhism started. And one thing we need to understand is this term Buddhism. We talk about Buddhism, but it isn't the case that the Buddha himself said, I'm going to create this religion called Buddhism. Okay. And in fact, I heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but the term Buddhism was actually created by Europeans who went to Asia, probably in the 1700s and 1800s, and saw people, you know, showing respect to images of the Buddha, and they came up with this term Buddhism. And in Tibetan language, the Tibetan term, they don't use the term Buddhism. The term they use for someone who's a Buddhist is Nangpa. Nangpa literally means an inner being, an inner being. And one way of understanding that is a Buddhist is somebody who looks inside themselves, inside their own mind, for happiness and peace and satisfaction, rather than most people in the world are looking outside. You know, they're trying to acquire wealth and power and prestige and thinking that's the way to find happiness. So a Buddhist is someone who looks inside of themselves, an inner person, an inner being. Okay, so anyway, so at the time the Buddha lived in this part of India up here around the Ganges River, he was actually just one of many spiritual teachers, spiritual masters who were they left the world, the ordinary worldly life. They were living in forests, they were meditating, they were discovering truths, having spiritual experiences, and then teaching disciples. So there were many teachers who had their systems, their practices, their disciples. And so Buddha was actually just one of these. He wasn't I mean, of course, he had his disciples who were very devoted to him, but at that point in time, it seems he wasn't necessarily very outstanding. He wasn't like the only one who was doing this. So it was actually, it wasn't until somewhat later that Buddhism became more widespread and became a more established tradition. So the Buddha lived for about 80 years, and he spent the last 45 years. He was 35 when he attained enlightenment. So the last 45 years of his life he was teaching. And because in those days there was no, rapid forms of transportation, so people mainly just walked from one place to another. So that's one reason why, the Buddhist teachings didn't spread too much beyond this area because you couldn't walk too far in those days. And so the Buddhist teachings were mainly confined to just this area. But then some of the Buddha's followers were merchants, and they really liked Buddhist teachings, and so because they were traveling a lot, they were bringing goods from one place to another. So that's one way in which Buddhist teachings did spread a little bit further than the Ganges plain. So then some centuries after the Buddha passed away. So again, the Buddha lived around the 4th and 5th centuries BC. And then this person, King Ashoka, was very instrumental in the spread of Buddhism. He was a king of most of India at that point in time. And it's said that in the early part of his life, he was he was kind of, I don't know, a bit like Alexander the Great. He was going around and conquering, making wars and conquering, and he wasn't. That sounds like he wasn't a particularly nice person. There were stories of him torturing and executing people that he didn't like or who disagreed with him, and so on. And in around 260 BCE, he waged this war against one kingdom over in the eastern part of India, which still wasn't under his control. And this battle was just terrible. There were about 100,000, 150,000 people who died, which is a lot for that time in the world. And so after this battle, he felt a lot of remorse for all the suffering that he had caused, people who died, and also the loved ones left behind who were grieving over the lost loved ones and so on. So he felt a lot of sadness. And after that, he became a Buddhist and became totally different, became a pacifist, non-harm, because Buddhism teaches non-harmfulness, compassion and non-harmfulness towards others. So he became a very devout Buddhist, a very devout follower of Buddhist teachings, and he sent Buddhist teachers all over India, to spread Buddhism all over India, and even beyond India, went into northern Asia, and there were some who even went as far as Greece and Egypt. And but it's not that he was trying to convert people, forcing people to become Buddhist, but he was very respectful to all religions, but just to spread the Buddha's word. And so this is really how Buddhism first became more widespread beyond just the area where the Buddha lived, due to King Ashoka. And then later, over the next couple of centuries, Buddhism spread even further, for example, into China, mainly through what's called the Silk Route, which kind of goes this way around Tibet, around the huge mountains into China. So it went into China around the 1st century BCE. I can't remember now. I'm not very good at history. Anyway, it went into China in the early days. And then from China, it spread further north to Korea and Japan. And then it also spread south into Burma. It doesn't show Thailand here, but Thailand is over here. Burma, Thailand, Indochina, and even down into Indonesia. This is Indonesia here, and also Sri Lanka. So again, Buddhism became more widespread. And then in the last couple of centuries, the 1800s and 1900s, it started to spread further west into Europe and also across the Pacific into America over here. So in the last couple of centuries, especially I think in the last 50 years of last century, from 1950 on, it became quite popular in the West. So there are two main traditions of Buddhism. And for the first 300 years after the Buddha lived and passed away, nothing was written down. So when the Buddha himself was alive, his teachings were not recorded, even though there did exist written language, but it wasn't used for teachings, for religious teachings. It was only used for official letters and government proclamations and so on. But religious teachings, there was this tradition of passing them orally from teacher to disciple. So disciples would just listen to the teachings, memorize them, keep them in their mind, in their heart, and then they would pass them on to their disciples. So they were just transmitted orally. So this is how the Buddha's teachings were transmitted for about 300 years after he passed away. And it was only after that, in around the 1st century BC, that they were written down. And then so one of the main traditions that's still existing today in Buddhism is called Theravada, which literally means teachings of the elders. And this tradition is the earliest. The teachings that they hold and maintain and transmit are said to be the earliest teachings of the Buddha. But as time went on, as Buddhism spread more and more, there arose different schools and also sub-schools. And this isn't something unusual. It happens in other religions. For example, in Christianity, there have probably hundreds of different denominations, and there's new ones popping up all the time, new types of church, new types of Christianity, and so on. And I think it's the same with other religions: Judaism, Islam, Hinduism. So there's many different branches, sub-schools. And also in psychology and science, we have many different points of view, different traditions, and so on. So this is the same in Buddhism as well. And these different sub-schools or traditions of Buddhism, they develop sometimes because of different ways that they interpret what the Buddha taught. Because sometimes the Buddha would just speak in very short sentences, phrases, and the people at the time understood what he was saying, but later generations didn't necessarily understand. And so they would start coming up with interpretations of what the Buddha meant. So different interpretations led to different schools. But sometimes the different schools arose because of focusing or emphasizing different teachings or different practices. Some said, oh, this particular practice is the most important one, and others would say, this one is the most important one. So it's just natural that type of thing would happen. So some of the sub-schools that developed after the Buddha passed away, some of them died out, disappeared. But new ones came up, and there's still, even today, new ones, new traditions of Buddhism that are appearing in the world. But I think, in a very general way, we can say that all the different traditions of Buddhism can be summarized into these two, which are called the Theravada and the Mahayana. So Theravada, the teachings of the elders, and that's the form of Buddhism that nowadays you find mostly in the Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Sri Lanka, Burma, Cambodia. And then Mahayana, which literally means the great vehicle, is the type of Buddhism that you find in the northern countries, such as like Tibet and China, Japan, Korea. But the difference between these two isn't geographic. Rather, it's mainly difference in the goal that one wants to attain and different texts that they use. So we'll start with the Theravada, the teachings of the elders. The language used in their text is Pali. Pali is an ancient Indian language. So their teachings, their sutras are preserved in that language, Pali language. And for someone who's following this tradition, the goal that one wants to attain is called the arhat, or arhat in Pali language, arhat in Sanskrit. So this is an arhat is actually a type of person. It's a person who has totally eliminated all of their suffering and the causes of suffering, ignorance, greed, hatred, all the disturbing emotions in the mind have been totally purified, totally eliminated. And this person is free of suffering. They don't have to take rebirth anymore. They don't have to suffer anymore. They're free. They're liberated. They've attained nirvana. So that's the main goal of this particular path. And the motivation why one wants to attain this goal is to free oneself from suffering, to get yourself out of this situation of having suffering. And the level or attainment that they reach is what's called nirvana or self-liberation. Sometimes it's called self-liberation because you liberate yourself. You free yourself from suffering. You get yourself out. And the countries where this tradition predominates are these: Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. But it has also spread to other countries in the last 100 years or so. So we also find people following Theravada Buddhism in Europe, in America, and Australia, and so on, and even monasteries of these traditions. So just to take a look at some of these traditions. So in Sri Lanka, this is one of the first countries Buddhism spread to from India. Today, about 70% of the people in Sri Lanka are Buddhists, and that means more than 14 million people. Many are monks. There are also many Buddhist shrines. This particular type of object is called a stupa. You find stupas in all the Buddhist countries. A stupa is a representation of the Buddha's mind, enlightened mind. So they're considered to be holy objects that you can meditate near, walk around, and so forth. And I just wanted to mention that Sri Lanka now there's this kind of a controversial situation with regard to nuns in Buddhism. There's different levels of ordination for nuns as well as for monks. there's what's called a novice level. That's like an initial level. And then there's the full ordination, which is called bhikshu for monks, bhikshuni for nuns. And over time, the bhikshuni, full ordination for nuns, died out in many countries, partly due to war and famine and so forth. So it did exist in Sri Lanka for a long time, and then it disappeared for about 1,000 years. But just in the last 10 years, it has come back. It has been reintroduced. So this is a group of nuns, fully ordained nuns in Sri Lanka. So that this is a very new thing, a wonderful thing that now women in Sri Lanka are able to take this full ordination. And the way it happened was King Ashoka, remember King Ashoka? His daughter, uh, she herself was a nun. She went to Sri Lanka. So she brought this Bhikshuni lineage to Sri Lanka, and it flourished there for a long time. And then it went from Sri Lanka to China, and then it flourished in China. So when it died out in Sri Lanka, they brought it back from China. So nuns from China, brought back the lineage of full ordination to Sri Lanka. So it's a very nice little exchange there. But probably most of the Sri Lankan Buddhists are lay people, and they traditionally wear white clothing when they go to the temples, where they go to meditate or pray or listen to teachings. They tend to wear white. And I haven't been to Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, it sounds like a wonderful place, but I have met some Sri Lankan Buddhists when I was living in Singapore and in Australia, and they're wonderful people. They're so warm and very devoted and very humble and very simple. Really, really beautiful people. And then another important country of Theravada Buddhism is Thailand, which I also haven't been to except for Bangkok airport a few times. And Thailand is the country that has the highest percentage of Buddhists in the world. 95% of the population of Thailand are Buddhist. Have some of you been to Thailand? It's a very popular destination, I think, for travelers. Nice beaches. Yeah.
I was just curious about, like, for example, in the Danish church, if you're baptized, then you're Christian. And is there some kind of universal, when can you say I'm a Buddhist?
That's the subject for next week. Next week, yeah, I'm going to talk about what it means to be a Buddhist, what it means to take refuge. It's what we call taking refuge. So I'm going to explain that next, what it is that, yeah, makes you a Buddhist. But for many people in Asia, I think they're Buddhist because they are born into Buddhist families. Their parents are Buddhist, their grandparents are Buddhist, most of the people around there, and they just follow, just like many Christians in the West. You just follow your parents, your family, your society. Yeah.
Do you know Thich
Yeah.
Is he Theravada?
No, Mahayana. Yeah, he comes from Vietnam, and in Vietnam, my understanding is they had both Theravada and Mahayana, but his tradition is Mahayana. We'll get to that. Yeah, so Thailand has about 55.5 million Buddhists. Many temple. I haven't been there, so many beautiful temples and statues, and also many monks. They also have this tradition in Thailand that almost all of the young men will take temporary ordinations, like for a month or longer if they wish. So it's a bit like doing military service, but peace service. So they'll wear robes and live in a monastery and just live as a monk for a while. And many of them still practice like the Buddha. They go once a day on alms round with their bowl, collect food from the lay people, and that's what they eat for the day. Some eat just one meal a day, and the rest of the time meditate. And again, there's an attempt to reintroduce the bhikshuni, the full ordination of nuns in Thailand, but it's met with quite a bit of resistance. Unfortunately, it seems to be going better in Sri Lanka than in Thailand. It seems that the monks in Thailand aren't too happy to be sharing their life with nuns. But there are nuns, fully ordained nuns. This one in the front, where's the cursor? This woman or this nun, I knew, I've met her. She was a professor in a university, a professor of Buddhist studies. So she's actually teaching monks about Buddhism. And then she decided to become a nun, and she's really working very hard to bring about this reordination of nuns in Thailand. Okay, so Mahayana. So I'm not looking at all the different Buddhist countries, but just some of them. Okay, so Mahayana, this other tradition, the language used, or the language in which the Buddhist scriptures are preserved in the Mahayana tradition is Sanskrit language. The goal that one wants to achieve is first become a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is, we talked about that the last couple of weeks, someone who wishes to become enlightened to help all living beings. So they have this great determination to help all living beings. And then eventually becoming a Buddha. So that's what one wishes to attain. And the motivation why you wish to do this is to free others from suffering. So if you remember in the previous, the Theravada, the goal, the motivation is to free yourself from all suffering, but here is to free all living beings from suffering. That's a big job, of course, but they say it's possible. And what you attain at the conclusion of the path is Buddhahood, becoming a fully enlightened Buddha, and omniscience. So they say that if you become a Buddha, when you become a Buddha, your mind is totally open, no hindrances to knowing things, so you're able to know everything. You have this mind is just totally open to the whole world and whatever exists. And the main countries where this tradition is found is China, Japan, Korea, Tibet, Vietnam, Mongolia, Taiwan, and then nowadays it's also spread to Western countries. So China is one of the earliest countries to where Buddhism spread, and there are many ancient statues and temples and so on. And China actually has the largest number of Buddhists in the world. There's 102 million Buddhists in China. But I think it's a little hard to know for sure because China was taken over by communists, and communists are not very supportive of religion. So there might be even more Buddhists who are like secret Buddhists. They don't want to declare because they can be persecuted. So even with communism, there's still a very large presence of Buddhism in China. There are also a lot of monks like these. I had to put this in, it's so funny. Flying monks. So have you heard of this? The Shaolin, they call it the Shaolin tradition. So it's actually a temple in China that's 1,500 years old, and they do have this tradition of martial arts. And I guess there's some controversy if this is really proper Buddhism or not. But apparently the monks do study Buddhism and practice meditation in addition to their flying around and martial arts. And from China, as I mentioned before, Buddhism of China also spread to Japan and Korea and Vietnam. And so the type of Buddhism that you find in those countries originally came from China. Like Zen, Zen is very well known, Zen Buddhism. Zen originally started in China, called Chan Buddhism. Have you heard of Chan? No. We hear of Zen, but you don't hear about Chan. But actually, Zen is the Japanization of Chan Buddhism. And this is the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh. He's also practicing Zen, but originally it came from China. But originally came from India. So the Buddhism of China came from India as well. Okay, then Tibet, another Mahayana country. And Buddhism came there a bit later, 6th, 7th century CE. But it became very widespread before the communist takeover in the 1950s. I don't know what percentage, but more than 90, probably 95 or maybe even 99% of the people in Tibet were Buddhists, and they had a large number of monks and nuns. And the Tibetans are very, very devoted people. Tibet is, or it was, a lot was destroyed, but a lot of monasteries and temples and stupas. And they also had this tradition of, well, art, painting thangkas and building statues and so on. They had this tradition of making these huge thangkas. I don't know if you can see it, but I don't know how big this thangka is, but it's like, when it's spread out, you have to put it on the side of a mountain because it's too big to fit in any building. So they have these thangkas that they bring out maybe once a year, twice a year on special occasions. I saw one myself in Tibet. It was just amazing. It would take like an army just to carry this thangka up the top of a mountain and then roll it down, open it up. Really, really amazing. And also Tibetans have this practice of like bowing, but full length, fully on the ground. And then they will sometimes travel from one part of Tibet to another by doing this. They'll bow all the way from their home, wherever their home is, to say Lhasa, the main capital of Tibet, where's the main temple. Sometimes it will take months. So they're just amazing. I've seen them in India as well doing this. And it's considered a practice to purify the mind of negative energy and karma and obscurations and so on. And it's not just a physical thing. They're not just doing like physical exercise, but there's a whole mental way of thinking, visualizing, reciting words along the way and so on. So anyway, this is just looking at some of the traditions in the different countries of Buddhism. So this is just a summarization of the differences between Theravada and Mahayana. These are the main differences: language used, goal, motivation, what you attain as the result of your path, and the countries, the main countries where it's found. So you can see Vietnam has both. It's on both lists. So there was, and still is, as far as I know, communism wasn't able to wipe out Buddhism in these countries. Well, we tried, but it's still very much alive. Yeah.
Do you know when Buddha had his experience, was it on a ground of Hinduism, where the Hindus at that time, in 2,500 years ago, you know, if like with Jesus, he was a Jew and then he became a Christian. Was it a Hindu world at that time?
Yeah. When we say, even Hinduism, the term Hinduism is just like an umbrella term, but there's many different, even today, but also at that time many different teachers, and they have their own different teachings and doctrines and ways of practicing and so on. So we give this term Hinduism, but it's not homogenic. It's varied. So the Buddha was certainly brought up in that tradition, and he studied under some of the teachers existing at that time, but then he wasn't satisfied with what they taught. It wasn't bringing him where he wanted to go. So then he went off on his own and found his own way. But yeah, I think some Hindus, I remember meeting somebody in a train in India, and he was trying to argue me. He said, well, Buddha was a Hindu anyway. You know, so he regarded Buddhism as just a branch of Hinduism. And anyway, so this is just a very rough map of the countries, the main countries of, so you can see the Mahayana is actually more widespread. There's probably more in terms of numbers in the Mahayana countries than in the Theravada countries, but it's not, they're just two different traditions, and they have many things in common, many similarities. And they don't get into wars with each other and kill each other over their differences. Thank goodness. Now, just a little about contemporary movements. In the Theravada tradition, there's the Vipassana tradition from Burma, Mahasi Sayadaw, and just examples of this in America. We have the Insight Meditation Society, and some of the teachers, Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg. I don't know if any of these names are familiar, but they're very well-known contemporary teachers in the Buddhism, and authors as well. Wonderful books by them. And then there's the Vipassana tradition of Goenka, which is also very, very popular. Does that exist in Denmark? Is there Goenka centers here? Anyone know?
There's communities in need, but you have to go to Sweden to do this kind of treatment.
Yeah. Okay. So Goenka was an Indian master. He passed away a few years ago, but he started this very, very well organized and well taught tradition of 10-day Vipassana retreats. So many people have followed that. And then another is what's called a Thai forest tradition of Ajahn Chah is one of the main masters of that, and present, he passed away, but still alive are some of his disciples, such as Ajahn Sumedho, who started Chithurst House in England, but they have many branches in other countries as well. Ajahn Brahm is also English but lives in Australia. So these are just some of the contemporary teachers in the Theravada tradition. And then in the Mahayana tradition, many different schools. This is Chan or Zen. It's probably well known in the Japanese name, Zen. Son, I don't know how to say that, Korean. and within that, there are different traditions like Soto Zen, which mainly emphasizes sitting, just sitting and watching your breath and not thinking about anything. But then there's also you've probably heard of the koan practice. This is Rinzai Zen. So they use koans, these little phrases that you, like puzzles in a way, that you contemplate, and it's supposed to break through your conceptions. Another tradition, which is not so well known outside of Asia, is called the Pure Land tradition. And this is very, very popular in China, among Chinese Buddhists, but also in Tibet and other traditions. Here you focus on a particular Buddha, such as Amitabha Buddha. Many, many different Buddhas, but the main Buddha is Amitabha Buddha. And so people recite the name or the mantra of Amitabha Buddha. They visualize Amitabha and the Pure Land of Amitabha. And their goal, their aspiration is to, after they die, be born in Amitabha's Pure Land, which is a place where you don't have so many problems and distractions, and you can just focus on practicing, meditating, and continuing your practice until you reach enlightenment. Have you heard of that tradition, Pure Land? Yeah. And then then there's the Vajrayana or Tantra tradition, which is prevalent in these countries, mainly Tibet and so on. Basically, it's based on the Four Noble Truths, the Mahayana path, but there's this practice of giving empowerments or initiations, and then what's called deity yoga, where you visualize different deities, and it's a practice mainly for attaining shamatha, calm abiding, and vipassana. So it's said to be a very quick path, not easy but quick if you can do it, for reaching enlightenment. Okay, so that's it. A quick rundown, a quick run through of the main traditions of Buddhism. Any questions? Sporsmo. We can turn the lights on now.
All the Tibetan schools like Lupa and Kati and Sokshu and Nyingma are all
Vajrayana. And Vajrayana is a branch of Mahayana. So they're all Mahayana. That means they're all for the purpose of attaining enlightenment, Buddhahood, to help all living beings. But then the Vajrayana element has these special practices, visualizing deities, visualizing mandalas, reciting mantras, and so on, which are said to enable one to quickly reach enlightenment. Because if you don't practice Vajrayana, it said it takes a long time to reach enlightenment. Many, many, many lifetimes, many eons. But with Vajrayana practice, you can shorten the amount of time it takes.
So that these images imprint on the mind, like mirroring yourself in something in that is faster.
That's one way. Yeah, they say one reason is because when you do Vajrayana practice, you're actually visualizing yourself as the deity in the middle of the mandala, and so it's like you're imagining you're already there. You're already a Buddha. You're already fully enlightened and doing enlightened activities. So they say that's one reason why it's faster. But another reason is because within Vajrayana there are practices for utilizing the inner energies. You say we have this whole like a psychic body with channels and energies, and you're working with those energies as well. And that's the main reason why it's faster. But it's harder. Faster doesn't mean easier. So it's like, flying a jet plane. If you fly a jet plane, you can get there faster, but you have to be really skilled to be able to fly a jet. So, but they say that even just to make some acquaintance, like starting to get familiar with Vajrayana practice and doing it is very helpful, because then at least we have a connection with it, and that will help us to meet it again in future lives and continue our practice wherever we left off. I'm going to close this down. Anyone else? So yeah, next week will be the last talk in this series that I've been going through, and I'll talk about what it actually means to be a Buddhist, and we talk about the three jewels in Buddhism, the three jewels of refuge, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, that we take refuge in. So I'll just give some explanation of that. And then following that, then next week I'll start a new kind of series of talks on emotions, how to work with emotions, disturbing emotions like anger, attachment. This is a really big topic in Buddhism, and it's very practical as well, because we all have these emotions, and sometimes we get overwhelmed by them and carried away by them and get ourselves into all kinds of sticky messes. So Buddhism has a whole range of different ways of working with emotions that's very helpful. So we learn how to manage our emotions, and you can even transform. You can even transform a situation where you're angry into a situation where you're able to feel compassion, or at least neutral feelings towards somebody, rather than anger and hatred. So it's wonderful. Well, no, that's a sort of more advanced Lojong, but before getting to that, there are other things you could do.
Transformation of mind.
Lojong does mean mind transformation, or mind transformation, but it's more in the Bodhisattva tradition. So I tend to see, I mean, there's some people it may be easy to practice, but I tend to see it as maybe a little more advanced. So I'm just going to start with more basic ways of working with emotions. We'll see if we have time to get into that as well.
I was transmitting from Malaysia today.
Uh-huh.
He said, Lojong is like a cure of depression, which is really overwhelming the world. He says that's the way.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, in a simple way, Lojong can just mean not focusing so much on me, but focusing on others, and developing more love and compassion and concern for others. So, I mean, definitely that helps.
That's what he said actually in Singapore. That, recognizing other people's joy is the way to transform your own religion.
Yeah. And I read about a woman who had been suffering from depression for many, many, many years, and she tried everything, different kinds of therapies and medications and everything that was possible, but nothing worked. And then finally she met someone who said, why don't you try doing acts of kindness? So she started doing that. She started, going out and helping people, doing things for people. And she did a lot of it. And kindness.
Okay.
Yeah, acts of kindness. And her depression disappeared. So, but she continued doing it. She didn't stop after, even after her depression went away. She continued because it feels so good, helping others. Definitely, it does. And there's scientific evidence as well. They say that you have more endorphins, more these hormones that make you feel good. So definitely, there's a physiological basis for that. Yeah. Okay, so let's stop there. And let's just take a few moments to mentally dedicate the positive energy we've created here tonight, doing meditation and then thinking about and talking about and trying to have a better understanding of Buddhism, different traditions of Buddhism. And we tried to do all of this with a good heart, with a feeling of warmth and kindness and compassion for ourselves and others. So try to feel that we have spent this time well. We've done good things here tonight. We've created some good energy, positive energy. And let's make a dedication of this positive energy, that it will remain with us, not be lost or disappear or dispersed, but continue to remain with us as much as possible, influencing ourselves and our way of seeing other people and behaving towards other people, so that we're more kind and helpful to others. And may it be helpful to them as well. May it help inspire them to also have more kindness, gentleness, and compassion, non-harmfulness. And may it help ourselves and others become free of suffering and the causes of suffering, and help us eventually get closer to our attainment of enlightenment, which is the fulfillment of our highest potential. Okay, thank you.
Sangye Khadro, I just want to say thank you. We're very happy from the center that we can offer these teachings to everybody who's coming. Thank you for coming. And the Dharma teachings are always for free, but we here as a center have to pay the rent. So if you like to come back next week or next year, and also want to offer the opportunity to others, please give a donation. We have this vase down here, and you can also pay by mobile pay.